Hello, everyone. I'm here kind of trying to do my first book review. Minutes ago, I just finished A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I hope that's how you pronounce it. And I'm doing my review right now while it's still kind of fresh in my mind. I don't annotate my books really ever, so I don't have anything written down. So I have a few notes I'll be looking at, but I read this book over a course of about 10 days. Um, and I really enjoyed it. I think there was a lot to take out of this book. Um, One of the biggest things right from the start is before reading this book, one of the things that people always talk about is how dark this book is, or like how this book gets like censored or banned or whatever. And I never really understood that because, one, I hadn't read it, but um, I feel like it takes a lot for me to become like not like triggered or offended, but like me thinking like, oh man, that is intense. And there was many moments in this book, particularly with like Jude's whole background, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that really like made me like sometimes just sit there for a minute like, oh my god, somebody really did not hold back when talking about this. You know, it's kind of like when like cartoons or movies or whatever, and like something bad is happening, but you still want to look through your eyes to see the bad thing. Like you based on like the context of the story, like when you're reading about the things that happened to Jude as a child, and things are gonna keep going deeper and deeper. Um, but you can't just stop reading the book right there. You have to keep reading. So it's like you're kind of plunging yourself into the depths of some really dark stuff. And I think it's crazy to think about how, um, you know, although this is a fictional story, things like this probably do happen in real life. There probably are children that are manipulated and lied to um, into I'm trying to keep it PG here for YouTube, like um, selling themselves, or they don't even have a choice when it comes to selling themselves. And I think that um, having the main character be a boy um, brings more light to a situation that these things don't only happen to women. When you hear about um, things of people getting abused and things like that, you typically think of women, but no, I mean, Jude had from day one had it rough. And I think it goes to show how like men's mental health isn't talked about as much. Men typically try to there's kind of the stipulation in our culture of keeping all this stuff in, and that we just have to move on. But I don't think that's the case in real life. But it brings light to a certain situation. And moving more into the story, straying away from Jude and kind of looking at everything, is there is, for how dark and sad this book is, there is love everywhere you look in this story. uh for how pessimistic of a person Jude is a loving person, um almost altruistic at times, where when he was with Willem, he did things that he wasn't personally comfortable with doing, but he did them because he wanted to um, please Willem and give him everything that Willem ever wanted. And same when he was a child with Brother Luke. There was things that he really didn't like doing, and although Brother Luke uh, would step in at times when certain things were happening, he still stayed. He still did what he did because he wanted to please Brother Luke. Because Brother Luke was nice to him, he didn't want to, and because he loved Brother Luke. And now, you know, by love, I don't mean like romantic love. I think that, Brother Luke was all that Jude had at the time. So, yeah, I think he cared about Brother Luke to an extent. And so he did things for him because he wanted to show him something, some sort of compassion. And, seeing all the people around Jude loving him and Jude thinking he doesn't deserve this love and that he, these people are just like people like Andy and Harold and stuff are just being nice to him because they feel bad for him. Like Julia and Harold giving like Jude everything, leaving Jude everything for when they die, and Jude thinking that it's just because they feel bad for Jude and that they know that Jude life hasn't been kind to Jude, but we see that with Jude's thoughts. He thinks that he's undeserving of all this, and that there's kind of like some behind the scenes, like Truman Show stuff going on almost, where everyone's kind of just being nice to Jude because they have to be or because they want something, not because they really care about Jude. And I think it's sad that I think it's kind of real when people say something is real. I think everyone has those kind of thoughts where they have doubts with the people in their life. They're like, do they actually love me? Or is it just because I have this X relation to them? And I think it adds a lot of depth to Jude's character. And so we're going to kind of jump to the ending. And if you haven't already read the book for some reason and already haven't had anything spoiled for you, it's going to be a really big spoiler. But one of the very few characters that survived was JB. And I think that reading that, it kind of gave me like made me think of like the snow globe effect, where you think like, oh, we have our, like, what if our whole universe is just inside of a snow globe that's a part of a whole bigger scheme? And although we did learn some stuff about Jude throughout the book, I wonder, what if Jude had, I mean, not Jude, JB, sorry. We heard about JB throughout the book or whatever, but it makes me wonder, like, what was JB's life like? And, we had, and you could apply that to any character, although Andy didn't make it to the final pages of the story. I wish I knew what Andy's life was like, and I also wish I kind of knew what like Harold and Julia's life were like, and then when you try to think about that on a bigger scheme, apply that to real life, all the people you pass every day, or maybe there's those coworkers that you don't really know a lot about. You could be passing people every day in line or whatever that have really deep personal life stories, and you just don't know it. And I think that it brings a different perspective to life, alongside the very ending when it's written from Harold's perspective, and he talks about how since Jude's death he's been very he's been trying to be very kind to everything around him. Where, like, he says if he sees the neighbor's dog, he sometimes thinks, like, what if that's Jude reincarnated, or just he finds more kind of peace where he can look around and, at least in his own mind, in his own world, see Jude. And hope that um, if there is something after life, that it's better for Jude. And yeah, so kind of jumping all over, I'm jumping to kind of the last quarter of the book, or third of the book, wherever, where Willem dies in the car accident. And if you don't remember, Willem's final thoughts were not of Jude, they were of his brother. And I thought this was very interesting because we see Willem devoting his whole entire life to Jude and spending every waking thought is of Jude. But still, in his final moments, he thinks about his brother, who was, in the grand scheme of things, not in his life for very long. And it kind of bounces back to the thoughts I was talking about earlier, where Jude thinks that, sometimes these people in his life aren't actually loving him because, caring about him because they love him. And it makes you think, what if Willem actually didn't love Jude? What if he was kind of doing it for some other reason, because he just wanted Jude to stay alive? That Willem devoted his whole entire life to loving. I'm sure Willem loved Jude regardless, because, they had their past and whatever, but what if Willem decided to be with Jude just because he knew that there weren't many ways there weren't many things that would probably give Jude reason for living. So if he knew that although he may be sacrificing this part of his life, he would be happy knowing that Jude was alive in it, even if that wasn't the most important person to him. And, it also, then I think that brings back more depth to Jude's character. What if Jude is right about all these things? And it's kind of like a paradox where we're kind of like, oh, if Jude's right, then whatever. But I think it's very interesting to think about. I'm kind of stepping away from the story now, more into the way it's written. I think it's very creatively written, where I think reading this book for a second or third time, you're kind of picking up little details, because you already know more about, because in the beginning of the book, before we learn all the details about Jude's life, he kind of makes allusions and stuff to it, and I think that knowing them before would make the story pretty cool, and more not that it's already not enjoyable, making it more enjoyable. And I think something that you see all the time in literature is kind of a cyclical narrative. And I think that I was not expecting this book to have a cyclical narrative. It's kind of loose, but how the beginning of the story has the story of Jude and everyone getting locked on the roof and have to jump down to the fire escape. And then the ending, the last sentence being Jude telling Harold he'll tell him about the story. So it kind of all loops back to the beginning. And I thought that was a way to make it less cliche and still have a well-rounded ending. And kind of more about the ending. So, well, not so much about the ending, but so all throughout this book, Jude doesn't really want to live, but he keeps living kind of because he feels like he's obligated to. And makes me kind of think about how a lot of people, one of my favorite manga of all time is called Monster by Naoki Urasawa, and one of the characters, Martin Reist, it's been a while since I've read it, but he has thoughts in this one scene where he says, no one truly wants to die. And that makes me think about Jude's life. Now Jude did attempt some things, but if Jude really wanted to, he could have killed himself at any point throughout the story, but he didn't. Even though all these bad things happened to him, he still wanted to live. There was still some fire inside of him. And I think that's a very, like, I don't know what the right word is, like, not awe-inspiring, but very, I don't even know the word is, but it just makes you really think that, there's, just how the title says, Jude's life is just a little life. Jude didn't live very long. It's compared to, like, average ages, whatever. And Jude is one person out of the billions in this planet. And I'm sure Jude is not the only person that has had a life like his. But Jude still wanted to live. And then, of course, he finally, ended things for himself at some point. But I think it's kind of very inspiring how, like I said, going back to that quote, nobody really wants to die. Now, of course, that's not 100% accurate, but it's crazy thinking about how people can have such a rough life and such a terrible past that they still want to live. And yeah, that's all I have for this book. This is my first book review, so it's kind of all over, but I hope you guys, if you haven't already, read this book. It's probably my top 10 books that I've read this year. Very good book. I could see myself coming back to it at some point, but yeah, that's all I have for you guys right now.